I love this wine because I think that it...
Oh my God, by the way. Wow. What a nose. Sorry to interrupt. That is...
More rose nose.
Wow.
A lot of new planting on rootstock. We don't have on our site yet. I'm a competitive person. I want to be the last standing own-rooted vineyard in the Yarra.
Welcome to part 2, everybody, of the Got Some Deep Dive on Mount Mary, as we are stoked to have your time. Sam Middleton, the chief winemaker and third-generation owner of the vineyard. It's a pleasure to have you here, mate.
Thanks very much for having me, guys.
This is going to be a bit of a focus on, I guess, the flagship of Mount Mary, which is the Quintet. And do you want to describe what you've brought in for the vertical and why you've brought these wines in?
This was the wine that my grandfather was so determined to try and make, an age-worthy, climate restrained style of wine from these varieties that really wasn't being done in the country at the time. So, it's been the flagship for the last 50 years. It remains the flagship. And I think that it's the most consistent wine that we make stylistically and probably from a quality sense as well. And I bought in 4 different vintages that I think best represent that story of the consistency through different climatic conditions. In vintages. So I bought some probably slightly cooler vintages and some warmer ones for us to have a look at.
Nice.
Now, the 2012 is what we're going to lead off with. Your first vintage.
My first vintage...
Not as as chief winemaker, I should preface that, yeah.
Yeah, I guess my first vintage with full responsibility over vineyard and winery. So I did 3 vintages with our old winemaker, Rob Hall, prior to 12. And I learned a huge amount from Rob. He did a fantastic job for 10 years. And he taught me a lot in 09, 10 and 11. It was a really fantastic Yarra year.
Oh my God, by the way. Wow. What a nose. Sorry to interrupt. That is...
More rose nose.
Yeah,
wow.
I guess in some ways it was a pretty easy vintage to kick things off with. The major thing we dealt with was a significant hailstorm on Christmas Day. It was looking pretty grey and Dad and I were sort of keeping an eye on the sky, and then all of a sudden it just came bucketing down and we had some of the biggest hailstones I've ever seen. All the family was sort of, looking up in amazement with smiles on their faces, and Dad and I were sitting at the kitchen table with our head in our hands going, this is just not good.
Well, you got one eye's on the kids opening Christmas presents and then your other eye's just peering out the window looking at the conditions going, shit.
Yeah, it definitely changed the vibe of the day a little bit for Dad and I, that's for sure. But it's sort of, storms often come in from the west. So we got quite a lot of damage down that western side of the vine. Thankfully, it was early enough for that damaged fruit to dry up. And it was really a kind of a natural... fruit dropping sort of episode. So it just lowered the quantity on the vine. And I think it was one of those years where all 4 estate wines did fantastically well. It's not always the case. Sometimes we look at the seasons as really favouring one wine over the other. But in years like 12, 15, 17, 21 was another one, everything seems to do really well.
Where you sit in the Yarra Valley, what differences are there? Like, as in altitude, different climates, different soils, even a little bit, maybe?
Often some people come to our site and they're confused with how we can plant so many different varieties right next to each other on the one, small patch of land. I often talk to the fact that we get a big diurnal shift in our temperatures during the growing season. So we get quite cold nights, but we do get quite warm days. And you really need those warm daytime temperatures to be able to ripen things like Cabernet Franc and Merlot, but you need those cool nights to preserve acid, freshness, and be able to, make consistently good Chardonnays and Pinots. Mm-hmm. So I think our site is very unique. Soils obviously play a big part in it as well, but to me that diurnal shift is super important. My grandpa would talk about Port Phillip Bay being quite a sort of important feature of not the landscape, but the area. So we get afternoon sea breezes during the growing season from Port Phillip Bay, which moderates those warmer afternoon temperatures. I think that as well helps to alleviate a bit of stress on the vine during those really warm temperatures, but also to retain acid and freshness in the fruit.
Do you see, because obviously we talked about the community that is the Yarra Valley and doing wine swaps and being friends with Casper from Tulangi, the chief winemaker there, and just being in that every day. Do you sometimes see other vineyards and get a little bit of like envy about their place, like their location? Like, oh yeah, that's a nice north-facing slope there. I would like that on my property.
Definitely. No, you always drive past, I guess different parts of the valley, whether it's got vines planted to it or not. sometimes I drive past a particular property and I think, oh, that just needs vines. Like we need to put some vineyards on that.
You ever knocked on the door of like an old couple who have been there for 40 years just going, any ideas what you're going to do with your acres one day?
I might do that in Gippsland. Who knows?
Right, okay. We did speak about that in the last episode.
I haven't done that in the Yarra yet, but yeah.
Little door drop.
See. Yeah, exactly.
I did that to get one of my place in Adelaide. I did a door drop and ended up getting a call back. So you never know what comes of it. Little handwritten letter.
Maybe that's where you create the opportunities, yeah.
So we've spoken about your grandparents planting these vines back in the day. The Quintet, obviously referencing 5 different grape varieties in there and being a Bordeaux blend. From the outset, that's what the vision was for this wine. Like it just seems so ahead of its time to be thinking let's blend these 5 wines. I mean, obviously people were blending, but just in the Yarra Valley, it would have been pioneering, I guess, in the community to be doing those sorts of blends, or am I wrong?
Yeah, so as I said in the first episode, in the 1850s, the Swiss settlers were making wine in the valley, and they were making a lot of wines from Cabernet-based wines, and these wines were doing very well on the world stage. A lot of them were being sent to the UK and doing quite well in wine shows and, as I said, winning awards. And my grandfather knew of this history, and so he already had an idea that these varieties could be well suited to the valley. He loved to drink left bank Bordeaux wines as well, particularly those wines of the 60s and the 70s. And I guess that's where he developed that passion to want to produce this wine. So he planted the varieties in the vineyard percentage-wise the way he thought would work best in the blend.
Oh, that's cool. Because you're on 40 acres, right?
The whole vineyard's about 45 acres now, and roughly 1/3 of that is planted to Quintet varieties.
Yep.
50%.
But the percentage of that third is in the percentages roughly of what's in the bottle? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so within that third, 50% is Cab Sav, 25% is Merlot, 15 is Cabernet Franc, and then 5 Malbec and 5 Petit Verdot.
And if the wines don't make the Mount Mary label, I mean, young vines surely will go into another label, right? Reflection or...
So we have been using Reflection as a tool to sort of declassify small parcels. And as you said, young vines in particular. So we've had to do a lot of replanting because of phylloxera now in the Yarra.
Yes, I saw that as well.
Yes.
You're doing a lot of that.
A lot of new planting on rootstock. We don't have phylloxera on our site yet. I'm a competitive person. I want to be the last standing own-rooted vineyard in the Yarra.
Yep.
So we've got quite strict farm gate protocols to try and keep it out. And I think, we're in a good position to be able to keep it out for as long as anyone, because we're fully self-contained to the property.
What is phylloxera? I've got no idea.
It's basically a microscopic aphid that, as you said, lives on the roots of vines, and it can travel by air or it can travel on people's boots. I wonder if it travels on kangaroo feet, because we do have a lot of kangaroos hopping through our vineyard, which is something that does worry me.
I had no idea. So you wouldn't worry about me coming down from Collingwood where we're recording today, or you would? Would you make me clean my shoes?
Me today?
I would need proof that you hadn't been to another vineyard that day.
Right.
No, I wouldn't ask for proof. I would ask you for your word, and you would say that I hadn't. I would let you in.
Okay, right.
It's something that we're quite strict with. But having said that, we want to be, we're realists as well. We think that eventually it'll get there. If you look around the world, there's been no country that's been able to completely contain it. So we want to be in a good position that when it does eventually arrive on the property, we can just sort of slowly shuffle over onto our rootstock vineyards.
Tackle it properly, yeah. And Sam, any provision to increase a little bit or buy a little bit more land, or is that really...
Gippsland.
Well, yes, but that would be a Mount Mary. That would be something else, right?
There's some small pockets around the property that I would still like to plant to. There's some small pockets that we have planted in the last sort of 5 or 10 years, but Dad sort of got to a point where he said, no more vineyard. I want to look out the window and see vineyard everywhere.
Yeah.
When I see vineyard, I see stress. So
I see work.
I want to see open paddocks and
not only the vine stress is my stress too.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's talk about the 2014. 2012, great story. I love that.
And my favorite so far.
Oh, well, of the two.
Of the 4.
Sorry, you've tried them all?
No, I've nosed. I've kept nosing over and over again. 12 is showing really nice.
Yeah,
nice
great.
Open. Yeah, really earthy, really beautiful, truffly.
They certainly smell different.
Yeah, I like the way the 12's aged. It was a vintage that needed that time. I think, I don't really like the word classic, but when you think of those classic Yarra Valley vintages, they always need time to develop and mature in the bottle. They don't often strike you as, the standout vintages in lineups, but they develop that, super interesting, complex characters as they age.
Very, very nice.
So what happened in 700 days?
So 14, I bought this one in because it's an interesting vintage. It was one that sort of got lost, I guess, in between 13 and 15. 15 was that year that everyone jumped on and talks about a lot of as one of the great Yarra vintages, and rightly so. 14, we had shocking weather in November 2013, so really small crops across all different varieties. Often, for some reason, it's Pinot and Chardonnay that gets hit most drastically with bad flowering and fruit set, but in 14, it hit basically every variety in our vineyard. So one of the smallest years. I think when you talk about only picking fruit from a single site and only picking fruit from our property, the quantity varies greatly. So in 2014, we did 34 tonnes total. And to give you some perspective on that, in 16, we did 96.
Wow.
So that can be the difference between tonnage from fruit picked off our property. I like 14 for that. It's a concentrated wine. It's tightly packed still. It's got beautiful tannin, but I think from those small crops from the bad flowering fruit set weather, combined with quite a warm vintage, so it was a pretty warm dry vintage as well. Certainly a lot warmer and drier than 12, and it's got that beautiful cassis. Probably I think is driven by Cabernet. Some vintages we see more Merlot, sort of representative in the wine, not as a percentage, but just as a character in general. But this wine's certainly a wine that I think Cabernet is the real driver.
2017, another 3 years down the track. Why have you picked this vintage to bring in today?
So I picked that to put next to the 14 because that was a much cooler, longer, more moderate growing season than what 14 was. The crops were slightly bigger, but I think an example of varieties that are really well suited to a region are varieties that go well in many different seasons, many different conditions. And although the 17 to me pushes a little bit more of that herbaceous character, it's not quite as big and robust. It's got some more florals and some more lifted characters. The seasons were very different, but I really like both those wines for individuality and, differences in what you see in the wine.
It is funny, obviously we're talking about the same vines, just different times, but there is a slight nuance and difference in these two on the nose. I mean, 3 years of age is obviously going to give some complexity and change anyway, but you're right. I do get, and maybe it is, the blind leading me, you're not blind, leading the blind, but just letting me know that herbaceousness, I do get that on the 17.
Pressure.
Yeah, I really do.
Yeah, and I guess it's a little bit harp back to the old school.
Is that because of the climatic year that makes you pick a little earlier, or
just a cooler vintage? In some years you just can't reach the level of ripeness in Cabernet in particular.
When do you call it? Like end of Feb, you picked this latest harvest, and I think Casper did as well for Toolangi. But were you sitting there in March going, "Come on, son"?
They're
I don't know how it works.
They're tricky decisions, and I often say, winemaking to me is like 90% revolves around your picking decision. And the rest of it's probably just glorified cleaning to a certain extent. So if you make the right picking decision and you clean well, you're probably going to make reasonable wines. I mean, you're watching numbers, as things are ripening, generally speaking, the sugar's accumulating, the flavors are changing, and the acid's dropping. If you're seeing pHs going up and acids dropping and nothing else is really happening, that's really a cue to say, okay, well, I think we've basically reached the end here.
Yeah.
I think when you talk about blends, it takes the pressure off picking decisions a little bit because you've got so many different varieties to rely on. And, we spoke about this with the Trelet as well, but we try to pick these varieties and handle these varieties in the winery as pieces of the puzzle. And so if I was making any one of these varieties as a standalone wine, maybe I would be thinking a little bit differently about when we pick them and a little bit differently about how we handle them in the winery. And the Merlot component is so important to this wine. To me, that really is the centerpiece of everything that we do. If we can get the Merlot nice and ripe, everything else kind of falls into place and it takes the pressure off a lot of these other things. And we can actually push the boundaries in terms of picking these Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon slightly earlier to add complexity to the blend because we've got that ripe batch of Merlot to really carry the concentration and the weight of the wine, if that makes sense.
Interesting, yeah.
What's the price that you guys sell Quintet for your mailing list?
So the mailing list price is $165.
Right. So I was in a wine store where they had it, with the classic white Posca pen, $275 for I think it was a 2019.
Yep.
When you go, obviously you've got to go and visit a lot of places, maybe just pop into wineries. How do you feel when you see such a large markup on your wines that kind of put it out of the scope of people who you would love to see assessing your wine for the first time?
Look, it's difficult. These things, to a certain extent, you can't control. I think we've had quite a unique pricing structure or business model that has always, I guess, encouraged people to buy directly from us. The business has been built on the back of this very strong mailing list customer base that we treat like family, and they're the ones that really allow us to do what we do. Every aspect of our sales model is important to us. Retailers supporting us, on-premise, they're all really important aspects of the business. But as I said, the pricing structure has always encouraged people to buy direct. And that's quite unique and probably getting uniquer by Australian standards.
I think what you're doing is special because of the sense that the wines are hard to get. And I think that creates a demand. Even for restaurants, we don't always have Mount Mary available. And I think that's good because, it creates a demand and it creates something special that people come for. And they're happy to pay the price. Then restaurants, of course, they will sometimes take advantages of that. But then again, it's business. And if people is happy to pay for it because they know the value, the intrinsic value of the wines, then they go for it.
We set the allocations, we stick to the allocations. We have a release period where we offer the wines to the mailing list. And then generally speaking, the allocation for the mailing list is sold out by the time the trade and retail start selling the wines. So that takes the pressure off what the prices were initially, and I guess that allows them to price the wines at whatever price they want because the wines aren't available from us anymore. We've always, as a family, wanted to keep our prices. We understand that we're at the top end in terms of pricing, and it's a small percentage of the wine drinking community that pay those prices for our wines. We understand that.
Deservedly, though.
We want to keep our prices honest and as accessible as possible. And what people do outside of that is, I guess, is their decision and their choice. And
I'm not saying $165 isn't at top price range, but we are drinking top price wine. So I think that is reflected in the glass. Sometimes you do pay. There's a lot of marketing cost that goes into some wines. And, I think even from the simplicity of your pared back labels and being really true to the homegrown family history, we are paying for what's in the bottle, not necessarily what's on the outside of it. Something
I do think about occasionally is, when the Langton's classification poster first came out, there was 3 wines in the top category, and it was Hill of Grace, Grange, and Quintet. That's the first 3. And I wonder what would have happened if we'd followed their pricing structure.
Yes.
Interesting.
True.
Oh, that's a great point. You all would have been around the same price at that time?
We all would have been at a similar price point at that particular time.
That's
even the Australis was the first $100 bottle of wine. Australis is like $500 a bottle though. But yeah, that's still a third cheaper than the Granges of the world. It is funny. So because some people do just put price around exclusivity around it. And for the quality of wine in the bottle, you're certainly getting the price per drop.
It brings me a little bit of, back to Burgundy, where you buy Costurie, for example, in Burgundy for a fraction of the price. I mean, if you go to a restaurant...
you were there, yeah.
If you go...
Carlos was sending me the prices when you were on holiday.
Soufflot or something, I think is a restaurant. It was one Michelin star. When he opened, I actually went for lunch, and I was by myself. I was traveling in Burgundy.
Yeah.
And I went to this restaurant, and the wine list had all the Burgundies, obviously, but and I went for the Villages wines, and I started with the Costurie, and I ordered the bottle, and I even asked them, can I order this? They're like, yeah, of course you can. Anyway, so they opened a bottle. I had a couple of glasses, and then I was meeting some other sommeliers from Melbourne that were also in Burgundy. And I thought, well, and I asked them, can I take this bottle home? They said, yeah, you can. It's fine. It's no problem.
Yeah.
I said, okay, perfect. And can I order another one? And they were like, yeah, sure, no problem. So I ordered a Ravenau as well.
No.
So and like less than €100 for both of the bottles. Yes, they were villages, but then again, if that was in Australia, it would be $300, $400 at least. So it would be at least 2-3 times.
So finally finishing on the 2021, sorry for my lack of knowledge or research on this, but do you hold bottles for a year under cork or screw cap before releasing, or do you get it out pretty quickly to the market?
Yeah, so at the moment we keep the reds for 2 years.
Oh, yeah.
So, well, the Pinot's in barrel for sort of 14 to 16 months. Mm-hmm. The Quintet's closer to 20 months.
Yep.
The whites are in barrel for 1 year, and they get 2 years in bottle before they're sold. So the reds are getting 2 years in barrel and then sort of 8 to 10 months in bottle before we sell them. So actually it's 3 years behind. So this year we'll be releasing the 2022. So this got
your
released
current
last
new
year.
Release, I guess.
Yep.
Up until, whenever it comes out soon.
Exactly.
What did you love about the 2021 year to bring this in?
Oh, it was, well, I don't know, you don't want to pick favourites, but I guess this sits alongside my other 2 favourite vintages, which were 15 and 17 from a Yarra Valley
and the 17
standpoint.
Was fantastic.
I love this wine because I think that it reflects the changes and I guess the direction that we've taken this wine. It's got vibrancy, a plushness of fruit to it, length. It drinks well as a young wine, but I think it's got so much potential for aging. And yeah, I think it's a good reflection of where we've taken this blend over the last 10 years and the direction that we want to take it into the future.
If Sam Middleton had to pick a wine 2021, so let's say someone buys it, when would you like to see it be drank?
Straight off the bat, it's such a personal preference. Some people love aged wines, others like them fresh. Yeah. I think personally, the Quintet drinks really well at that sort of 10 to 15 year mark. It's still got freshness of fruit and vibrancy, but it does have that secondary complexity that's developed in the bottle. Some people would drink this 30 years old. Some people would drink it 3 or 4 years old. I think that it needs at least 3 to 5 years. I like them 10 to 15. There's no reason why you can't drink them 30 years old.
I would also go for older always, yeah.
Okay. Well, I know Carlos is going to reference his 2012, right?
Yeah, I still like the 2012 the most right now.
Yep.
Out of the 4.
Yep.
I feel like it's earthy, leathery, that tobacco-ish is drinking really nice, I find. I think the 14, without swirling the glass, it jumps out the mocha coffee flavor, which I really, really like. On the 17 is that green note, and it's so evident if the glass is there for...
Careful with the use of green.
No. I mean, not in a bad way. Yeah. Not in a bad way. Yeah. Not in a bad way. That's like Parisian, bell pepper. Yeah. Which is good. It brings a sense of freshness and obviously longevity, I find as well. Yep. And the 21 feels. Yeah. I would want to have this another 2, 3, 4 years at least. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. Yeah.
But it's showy, it's plummy, and his character as intensity, I just find another 2, 3 years probably. Yep. But that just goes to show wait a little bit, try to find a older bottle.
It's holding its cards close to its chest, the 21. It hasn't revealed everything that it has to offer yet. I think it's a little bit locked down still. But the palate, I think, really speaks a stronger story than the nose at the moment.
But it is amazing to see what 10 years looks like from bringing this vertical, because, they are very different wines, but obviously the same characteristics. It's amazing. And that's what the best thing about this podcast is not only to hear your story and the story of Mount Mary, but also to be able to experience this, because I can go out and luckily get a bottle of wine, but I can't hear the story behind it. And, whenever I see a 2012, I'll remember that Christmas and, the November of 2020, which one was a bad November?
2014.
2014, so November 2013, the bad weather events. These are stories that I'd love to share with my friends when we're opening up these bottles. So thank you. Hopefully people listening can get those same experiences.
Sounds good.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Sam.
Excellent. Thank you.